Wow, what a great crowd. We're so excited this morning. Good morning, everyone, and aloha, bula. My name is Monica Medina, and I'm the Assistant Secretary for Oceans, Environment, and Science at the State Department. And it is a pleasure to be here today to introduce this panel of experts and to tell you about an exciting new initiative led by the State Department and the U.S. government. In case it wasn't already apparent, the U.S. is back at the COP, and we are here to live up to President Biden's commitment to listen to the science, expand equity and inclusion in climate at this critical moment, and work to ensure to keep warming to 1.5 degrees. The effort that we are undertaking now to mitigate and adapt to climate change is especially urgent. In fact, it's an existential threat to island nations. It reminds me of the voyage of the Hokulea, a type of traditional Hawaiian sailing ship that first brought Hawaiians to their island home. These ships and the brave islanders who sailed them thousands of miles without mechanical propulsion or navigational instruments connected the islands of the Pacific across vast distances. It required courage, ingenuity, and an unshaking belief that we are all connected on this planet and we are better off together. No man is an island, as John Donne's famous poem reminds us. And in that spirit, last week, just a week ago, President Biden announced a new initiative called PREPARE, the President's Emergency Plan for Adaptation and Resilience. Under PREPARE, the U.S. will focus its adaptation and resilience work on locally led efforts to increase knowledge, improve planning, and mobilize resources to meet the climate challenges and increase the adaptation needs of the world today. I am very excited to announce that as part of our PREPARE commitments, we will be providing an initial $9 million to support something called the Local 2030 Islands Network. The Local 2030 Network is an innovative, island-led coalition of partners committed to achieving net zero emissions and adapting to climate change. It advances community-driven adaptation by building on the traditional knowledge of the early Polynesian voyagers and their historic resilience in adapting to climate change. I'm so pleased that the leaders, the initial leaders on our panel today, are here to help us explain about the network and tell us why it's so important to them. So let me introduce them. First, we have the Prime Minister of Fiji, Frank Bainimarama. We also have the Minister of Climate, Resilience, and Environment of Grenada, Simon Steele, and the Climate Envoy for the Marshall Islands, Kathy Jitnell-Kijiner. These are founding members of the Local Island 2030 Network. I'm also pleased that the State Department will be partnering with NOAA, my former agency, on the Local 2030 Network, and on the 7th annual Our Oceans Conference, along with the mighty nation of Palau, that will be held the 16th and 17th of February in Palau. I also want to introduce the moderator of the panel, the administrator of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and the Undersecretary of Commerce, Dr. Rick Spinrad. And now, it is my great honor to introduce a giant in ocean and global conservation who really needs no introduction. He took the concept of fully and completely protected marine protected areas in the U.S. and he supersized it, greatly expanding the Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument in Hawaii, the Pacific Remote Islands Marine National Monument throughout the Pacific, and he even created the first marine national monument in the Atlantic Ocean called the Canyons and Seamounts National Monument off the coast of Secretary Kerry's home state of Massachusetts. He's our first island president. His leadership on marine protection is so significant that a newly discovered species of tropical fish was named the Obama basslet in his honor. So everyone, please join me in giving a warm Hawaiian Islands welcome to President Barack Obama.
Well, thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. It is wonderful to be here. Let me just first of all point out that that fish that Monica mentioned was a very small fish, but it meant a lot to me. I am so pleased to be here with all of you for this important discussion about how to support efforts to promote island resilience. As probably all of you know at this point, I have been shaped by my experience growing up in Hawaii, and I know that our outstanding governor from Hawaii, Governor Ige and First Lady are both here, and I'm grateful for all that they've done to protect our islands. I am an island kid, and while I was president, I was proud of the work that we did to work with island nations who were most vulnerable to changing climate, even as they did far, far less, if anything, than the larger nations in actually causing the climate crisis. And I remember in Paris, we had a meeting of a group of island leaders to hear directly from them about how climate change was already having an impact. And the effect of that meeting was outsized. It had a huge impact, in part because these leaders were able to communicate in very concrete human terms what so often is a bunch of abstract numbers. People were being affected in very specific and immediate ways, and tragic ways. And so it put images and faces and emotions and moral authority behind the efforts to form the Paris Accords. It was a reminder that in many ways our islands are the canary in the coal mine in this situation, that they are sending a message now that if we don't act, and act boldly, it's going to be too late. And it also highlighted the fact that this is not something that's 10 or 20 or 30 years down the road. This is now, and we have to act now to help with adaptation and resilience, which I know is a theme of COP 26 today. So I don't think, I genuinely think we would not have gotten as ambitious an agreement in Paris had it not been for the willingness and the capacity of island nations to step up and be heard. And for that, we want to thank you. But I also think that it's important for us to recognize that, as was true 5 years ago, we have not done enough, and our islands are threatened more than ever. And that's part of the reason why I'm so proud of the fact that the U.S. government and Joe Biden is giving the issue the attention that it deserves. His commitment to provide an additional $3 billion to extend a hand and support those who are most vulnerable to the impact of climate change, including islands, can make a difference. That's a substantial increase in support. It's an investment in our common humanity. It's an essential piece of the work that's being done here in Glasgow. And I think it is representative of an essential element of anything that we're going to do collectively on the climate crisis, a recognition that all of us have a part to play, all of us have work to do, all of us have sacrifices to make, but those of us who live in big, wealthy nations, those of us who help to precipitate the problem, we have an added burden to make sure that we are working with and helping and assisting those who are less responsible and less able, but are more vulnerable to this oncoming crisis. Also, as a Hawaiian and as American, I was proud to see the Biden administration embrace the local 2030 island network. Through this initiative, U.S. islands like Hawaii, Guam, and Puerto Rico will connect with island nations and islands around the world as they take the lead in pursuing sustainable development and adapting to climate change. Initiatives like these help provide badly needed resources, but they also forge connections. And by sharing best practices and forging a unity of purpose, they offer a model of what's needed around the world if we're going to make sure that the promises in Paris and the promises that are made here in Glasgow are actually kept, and that we are continually increasing ambition until we get a full handle on this problem. I'll close just by saying there's an old Hawaiian proverb, pupukahi I holomua. That's roughly translated into unite to move forward. And it's a reminder that if you want to paddle a canoe, you better all be rowing in the same direction and at the same time. Every oar has to move in unison. That's the only way that you move forward. And that's the kind of spirit that we need to protect our island resources. That's the kind of spirit we need to protect our people. It's a different mindset. It's an open spirit, and that's what all of you bring to bear in this discussion. Some of you are small countries, don't have large populations, but you got a lot of heart. And you are protectors and preservers of what is a vital link for all humanity to this planet. Your voice has to be heard, and I'm glad you're here representing those nations and making sure that the rest of the world is listening. All right?
Thank you, President Obama. Let me start by thanking Assistant Secretary Monica Medina for that very warm introduction and opening remarks, and a special thanks to you, President Obama, for joining our island event and providing these insightful remarks that we've heard, drawing from your own personal perspectives growing up in an island nation. Your leadership on climate change and issues strongly reflected by your actions as President, including the expansion of the Papahanaumakuakea National Marine Monument to become one of the largest protected areas in the world, is just one example. Conserving our marine and coastal ecosystems protects vital blue carbon and provides additional support to climate-stressed resources such as coral reefs. We're also very fortunate, as you heard from Assistant Secretary Medina, to have a panel of leaders and visionaries for our discussions here today. And I have the privilege of serving as a moderator for what I'm sure will be a very fruitful discussion. We're joined by the Honorable Prime Minister of the Republic of Fiji, Frank Bainimarama, who has been a powerful voice on climate change issues in the Pacific and for islands around the world for many years. Thank you, sir. I'm also pleased to introduce Minister for Climate Resilience and Environment, Simon Steele from Grenada, an outstanding champion of climate actions in the Caribbean. Thank you, sir. And I'm especially pleased to introduce Kathy Jetnil-Kijiner, co-founder and director of the Republic of the Marshall Islands-based nonprofit Jojicum, dedicated to youth and environmentalism, and an Obama leader, Asia Pacific, and member of the inaugural design cohort. Island nations are among the most vulnerable to climate change, but they're also at the forefront of efforts to adapt and develop pathways to climate resilience and sustainable development. Today's event is an opportunity to highlight the unique challenges and opportunities facing our island nations and ways we can share solutions and learn from one another. Knowledge and information, particularly that which is co-developed and tailored through community engagement, are key elements of efforts to address climate risks and vulnerabilities and foster adaptation solutions. Climate products, services, decision support tools, and early warning systems enable us to better prepare for and respond to climate change. The more we know, the more we can do. This information is most useful when it's developed through scientific collaboration and partnerships, local ingenuity, and sharing of experiences across national borders. I would like to reaffirm the commitment of my agency, the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, to working with the global community to foster adaptation and resilience. We are pleased to be part of partnerships that bring people together to address the climate challenge, such as the Local 2030 Islands Network that you heard mentioned by President Obama and Assistant Secretary Medina, and the new Pacific Regional Training Center for Ocean Acidification, a critical issue. Hosted by Fiji, it's a good example of countries and organizations coming together to monitor and understand changing conditions in the environment. Toward this end, I'm honored to have this opportunity to moderate today's roundtable to learn from 3 renowned champions of island adaptation and resilience. So let's begin, and I'd like to start by asking a question that is specific to what's going on here in Glasgow these 2 weeks. The question for the panel is, what Paris promised the world, we are charged to deliver here in Glasgow. With 1 week of this milestone gathering behind us now, what has most excited you about the global pledges and actions announced, both for your island's clean energy future and for adaptation and resilience? Prime Minister, I'd ask you to start, please.
Thank you, and good morning to you all. Good morning, Mr. President. Mr. President, seeing you here remind me of COP21 in Paris. There, the American and Pacific leadership rallied the world to produce the Paris Accords that we are now here in Glasgow to turn into action. Mr. President, thank you for making the trip to be with us in Glasgow. We all know that you are the son of a Pacific, and I need not remind you of the threat, excuse me, our region faces from a changing climate. Alongside the late, great Tony de Broom, and I understand great niece is here with us, you helped to deliver the Paris Accords that we are here to enact. That legacy of leadership is at stake here in Glasgow. And so is the very existence of Fiji's low-lying neighbors of Tuvalu, of Kiribati, and the Marshall Islands. We welcome the new commitments made last week, but with due respect, Mr. President, I can't feel any excitement for them because they are timid and inadequate. Several major players, of course, as you know, are missing in action, and others have shown up with insufficient commitments that have succeeded only in erecting speed bumps on the road that leads to the wrong side of 1.5 degrees of warming. Developed nations are failing us. They are the ones with the resources and the technology to make a difference. Yet, they have left the potential for clean energy and adaptation on the table by missing the 100 billion pledge 2 years running. Among others, the USA is woefully short of paying its fair share of climate finance. Now we, the most vulnerable, are told to suck it up and wait until 2023. There's no delay, Mr. President, to build resilience across Fiji's over 110 populated areas, islands. 13 cyclones have struck Fiji since we ratified the Paris Agreement. 13. And though our carbon emissions are negligible, we are embracing the opportunity of net zero and the good green jobs and energy independence it can create. But money matters, plain and simple. These changes require upfront investments we cannot always mount alone. We are doing all we can. Fiji is creating an entire economic sector that is dedicated to building climate resilience. Through a groundbreaking Climate Change Act, we have legally empowered ourselves to become net zero, harness nature-based solutions, fortify our infrastructure, and hold the private sector accountable, while also unlocking its innovative potential. That is all good. But we're also breaking ground in tragic ways we never wanted. Pacific nations have collectively agreed to a declaration to preserve the sovereignty of our waters, even if land masses are lost entirely. Fiji has a trust fund for relocation that finances the movement of communities and infrastructure to higher ground. And we have offered refuge to the people of Kiribati, Tuvalu, in the event their nations are lost to the rising seas. So to answer your question, sir, no, I'm not excited. I'm not prepared, along with every Fijian, to do what is necessary to secure our future and ensure we can grow our island economy in a warmer world. We have solutions. We're developing more, and we are always keen to share our experiences, just as we are keen to grow small island development state's share of access to finance. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for that particularly insightful and cogent comment and very candid observations. Very much appreciate that. Minister Steele, would you care to comment?
Thing is like, yeah. So thank you, Chair, and recognizing President Obama, Island Kid, fellow panelists. What we've seen over the past week are a string of announcements and initiatives, whether that's on coal phase-out, the global methane pledge, commitments to end public financing for the fossil fuel sector, new initiatives and signatories on deforestation, clean technologies, nature, agriculture. These are all important for ambition and action, for the global financial markets, for the private sector. And it's important to recognize the leadership of the UK presidency in driving the process to get us here. And for my great ocean state of Grenada, the future of countries like mine depend on whether or not coal seams around the world are left as they are. So these are all important steps that we are seeing here in Glasgow. However, we also need to see the promises trickle down to meaningful action on the ground in countries and communities that are working hard to transition to clean energy and a more resilient future. Across different sectors, energy, transport, waste management, etc., the call for a just transition is very, very real. Now, back to the international stage, let's be clear. Our job here in Glasgow is far from done. Political heavy lifting is needed in this second week if we are to collectively deliver on truly keeping 1.5 within reach. The science tells us we still have a long way to go. The latest NDC synthesis numbers tells us we're tracking to a 14% increase in emissions rather than a 45% reduction by 2030, and that we are on a 2.7 degrees C of warming trajectory, not the 1.5 that we in the islands so desperately need the global community to hit. So efforts need to continue immediately after this COP. And our decisions here in Glasgow need to translate into more ambitious, accelerated action starting in 2022. As President Obama said, climate change for us in the islands is not an abstract thing. It's real and it's lived every single day. And if mitigation is a marathon getting us to that 1.5 degree target, Adaptation and resilience building is the sprint as we battle the daily impacts of intense hurricanes, more frequent floods, droughts, and the urgency to protect lives and livelihoods. Challenges are still before us, the announcements heard promising, but we need to deliver still on very, very concrete actions. Chair, I thank you.
Thank you, Minister Steele. Director Jetnil Kijiner, would you care to comment on the question of what has most excited you halfway through COP26?
Thank you. Excellencies, President Obama, I'm really grateful to be here and to be able to speak on behalf of Marshall Islands. I think it was Tepeli Ofa, the Tongan scholar, who said smallness is a state of mind. And I think that's really applicable to the ways in which islanders, despite being small in land mass, has been really holding their weight throughout these conversations and holding the line in these negotiations. So we're really grateful to also be a part of the Local 2030 Islands Network that will allow us to continue to exchange knowledge across islands. As far as this week and the pledges that have been coming forward, we are excited about the different pledges like the Deforestation Pledge and the Global Methane Pledge. I think that a pledge is a good start. However, we are more looking closely at implementation. So what comes after these pledges? What comes with action? And that's where we'll really be holding the larger states accountable for how they will deliver on these commitments. As convener of the High Ambition Coalition, we're also really excited about the statement that has been put forward that includes doubling adaptation commitments. And I was also appreciative of the announcement that was just made from the US about increasing adaptation funding. I think the thing that I'm most concerned about coming into this COP was increasing funds for adaptation specifically. For the Marshall Islands, we're looking at several billions of dollars for implementing our National Adaptation Plan. We've received preliminary studies that show us estimates, and it's tens of billions for reclaiming land, for elevating parts of our land, for internal migration within our islands. And these are really extreme, hard adaptation solutions that are coming down the barrel, and they're coming down quite soon. Considering the fact that we are passing the 1.5 degree threshold very, very soon. So for us, adaptation implementation is key. The funding towards that is what we really need. So it was really exciting for us to see that the signatories have committed to doubling adaptation within the High Ambition Coalition statement. And another important thing that commits signatories within the statement is when we negotiate the new target in 2025, these targets will be based off of science. As we know, the $100 billion mark was sort of just an estimate that wasn't based off of real science. And if we look at the science and the costs, it'll probably be a lot more than the $100 billion that we have right now. And so seeing that and being able to base it off of science, I think that will really help with managing the type of funds that small island states really need to be able to implement the adaptation structures that we're planning, the adaptation pathways that we're currently planning. So I think I'll just close with that, and thank you again for having us here. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. I wonder, President Obama, if you might make some comments based on what you've heard.
I do. First of all, let me start with Kathy, who I had a chance to know some of the work we've been doing in the foundation. I think she is an example of the kind of next generation of leader that is on the front lines of this fight and whose voices are necessary. Us old folks, the gray-haired types or the no-haired types, sometimes I think make excuses for why things aren't happening as fast as they should and this and that. And youthful impatience and willingness to speak truth to power and do the work, I think is absolutely vital. I'll be addressing that a little bit later, both in a plenary speech I'm making and then a roundtable with young leaders from around the world. Two themes that I heard discussed that I think are important. The first is the importance of follow-through. Look, I've been talking to John Kerry and others who've been involved in pushing as hard as we can in this process. And I know that, as was true in Paris, the current national plans cumulatively and pledges made still don't get to 1.5. And so there are times, I think, when that makes us feel discouraged, naturally. On the other hand, if everybody follows through with just the commitments that have already been made at this conference, the latest data indicates that we'd get to about 1.8. Now, that's a big if. That's still not enough. On the other hand, there's a difference, as the Prime Minister of Fiji mentioned, the number 2.7. 2.7 and 1.8 makes a big difference for island nations. And then 1.8 and 1.5, that makes a big difference. So every degree to which we can mitigate counts. And I think that, as Kathy indicated and as both the ministers implied, if we are following through on all the bold pronouncements and steps and pledges that have been made, then that's real progress. Not enough, but it moves us in the right direction. But that does require ongoing activism in between these COP conferences. And it means citizen pressure on both public sector and private sector actors to ensure that there is actual follow-up and that we're actually documenting that. And island nations, I think, have a story to tell because they're on the front lines of making sure and calling larger nations, the main emitters, into account if they are not following up. So, and you know what? I'll help give you a platform for that if that's the case. The second point, I very much liked what Minister Steele talked about when he says mitigation is a marathon, adaptation resilience is a sprint. I think that is a good framework to think about this. The truth is that organizing a lot of nations around the world, all of whom have legacy energy systems, vested interests, politics, et cetera, coordinating all that to move the entire planet's energy grid in a new direction is not going to happen overnight. It has to happen, and we have to push. But there are going to be, we're going to go forward. There are going to be some setbacks. There are going to be laggards, right? Nations that don't follow through. And so we just have to be determined and have massive patience and just continually pound away at the problem. But resilience and adaptation, that has to happen now. And I think having that parallel time frame, recognizing that in assisting island nations, particularly those that almost by definition had nothing to do with this problem and are bearing the effects most severely. There is a documentable, finite amount of money that can go to helping those countries right now. And the sooner we start helping, in fact, the better off we're going to be, and in some cases, the more money we'll save, rather than waiting until things are crumbling and you've got crisis. So I do think that it is worthwhile for countries to think about green funding both in terms of long-term, but allocate and be definite, have a clear plan about what is it that we're doing to help those who are in harm's way as we speak. And that's something, again, that I would be open to championing as we go forward. So I appreciate very much the input. I think I'm going to get dragged to another portion of this gathering, so I'm going to be taking my leave at the moment. I may see you, I'm sure I'll see some of you in the next thing. I do want to say one last thing, and this is for Richard and Monica. The politics in the United States are not always easy, as you may have noticed. And my successor maybe wasn't as interested in climate science as I was, it turned out. But there are a lot of people in the U.S. government who care about this deeply and work really hard and are invested. Our politics are not always easy. And yeah, we're not unique in that regard, but I think it's a good time now, because most of the time when you are dealing with and sometimes expressing frustration towards U.S. delegates at these COP conferences, I just want you to know that they're the ones who are championing your cause back home. It's just that, you know, we got our own politics that we got to deal with, but these are outstanding public servants and scientists who really care about these issues and are listening to you. Sometimes it'll feel, I guess specifically to the point that the Prime Minister of Fiji mentioned, sometimes it may feel like the United States, like some other countries, are not always moving as fast or following through on their commitments as much as we'd like. It's not for lack of trying by the kinds of people who you are working with here. But you know, we've got our contentious battle. It's one of the things about democracy. It turns out you don't always get your way. But two cheers for democracy, as they say. I think that was Mr. Churchill who said that. So I want to say that because both Richard, Monica, John Kerry, those folks are really working hard and care about this issue a lot. And so that's not to let us off the hook when we're not doing what we need to do, but it's just for you to know that oftentimes you're preaching to the choir when it comes to the delegations that are represented here. So, all right, see you guys in a bit. Thank you.
Thank you, President Obama, for your strong, clear-eyed leadership throughout, and also for that shout-out to the civil servants around the world who are working hard to solve the problems.
They're all underpaid.
You got some applause for that. Thank you, sir.
That's not unique to the U.S.
We have just about 10 minutes. We have another important question that I'd like to ask of the panel. And as I was listening carefully to your comments, there was a statement that you made, Minister Steele, about having a core for a just transition. And so this question deals with the progress that we have made. And I'd like to ask you specifically in that regard, we have together made great strides in our understanding of climate change and its impacts on people and places, as well as options to address them. We've improved information, tools, and decision support services. How have these approaches helped island communities, cultures, economies, and ecosystems adapt and become more resilient? Prime Minister?
Thank you. Thank you for that statement. I'd like to say that today, no nation can claim inaction out of ignorance. We have known about this threat for decades. And the most recent IPCC report has put a mountain of evidence behind their experiences. My people have lived and confirmed our worst fears. The latest science shows us we must have global emission by 2030, half global emission by 2030, and achieve net zero by 2050. If we fail, the 1.5-degree aspiration of the Paris Agreement will be our epitaph. One arena in which Fiji has made remarkable progress is our work to reduce disaster risks. I have mentioned about Cyclone Winston often. In 2016, Cyclone Winston struck Fiji as the strongest cyclone to ever make landfall south of the equator. It claimed 44 lives and wiped out 1/3 of the value of our GDP in 36 hours. By improving community readiness to this new breed of superstorms, we've saved countless lives through the 12 storms that have followed on Winston's heels. Our forecasting technology has been upgraded, and communities now know what to do and where to go. And most importantly, they know how to treat advanced storm warnings with deadly seriousness. Building of new and existing science, Fiji is working with the UK Space Agency and NORAD to enhance our ability to map sea level rise, improve coastal development, manage climate-induced human migration, and perform hydrological and wind modeling to better understand our island's renewable energy potential. Our economy, however, is still extremely vulnerable. Our networks of infrastructure will take years and massive levels of investment to properly adapt our roads, schools, homes, utility infrastructure. All of it must now meet new standards of resilience. And we know that adapting now is more affordable than rebuilding from the rubble of cyclone-driven devastation. Nature is one way we're delivering solutions that work and that we can afford. The number one request I hear when I visit Fijian communities is for new seawalls. Concrete seawalls are a major investment. They take time and they demand huge resources. But we've learned that eco-walls made of boulders, big boulders, mangroves, and vetiver grass work just as well, if not even better. They're cheaper. Communities already have much of the expertise needed to do the work to build them. And we are also beginning constructions on an photovoltaic farm on our 4th largest island in pursuit of 100% renewable energy generation. We recognize that a healthy ocean makes for a healthy climate. And we have committed to bring all 1.3 million square kilometers of Fiji's ocean under sustainable management, with 30% as marine protected areas. The ocean has been our shield against the worst of climate change by serving as a carbon sink. We believe that paired with emission cuts, it can become a solution to energy generation and a source of resilient economic development. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Minister Steele.
Thank you. We've just heard from the Prime Minister of Fiji. We'll hear from the Marshall Islands, Grenada. You'll hear from all of the islands in this room, some of the great work that is taking place in islands all around the world. Small island developing states continue to demonstrate real leadership in these very and increasingly challenging times. Grenada was the first in the region to establish a dedicated Ministry of Climate Resilience focused on building resilience on our island. Progressive policies, programs, one of the first to submit a new NDC globally, mainstream climate change across the whole of government projects. In relative terms, one of the more successful islands within the region in terms of resource mobilization and information tools, support, all of those things are central to the decision-making processes that have gotten us to where we are. Our small size gives us a very deep understanding of the problems that we face and how to tackle them, whether that's from an environmental perspective, social, economic, technical. We can see the cause and effect of positive actions, negative actions, and the respective outcomes. And with all of these challenges that we face, we're also presented with a massive opportunity, an opportunity to be a global exemplar, to be able to demonstrate to larger, more developed nations what can be achieved with real political will. But there's a however to this. Without the right support, and we come back to the points raised in the earlier question, without the right support, we will always be the victims in this story. But with the right support, and we are far away from that, we can be a part of the global solution also. And this is all that we ask, to be given a chance, not only to save our island nations, but to be that exemplar of leadership and action to the rest of the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Director Jetniel Kijiner, please.
Thank you. I think I want to talk about our National Adaptation Plan. That's been a real key focus of everything that we've been discussing out here when we've been at COP, and for good reason. Our National Adaptation Plan is what we're calling our survival plan. It's our most comprehensive plan that we've developed so far that is including a community consultation and including science that we've collected on our own already. It's based off of surveys and community plans that were developed by each island, conservation plans called Remalak. I know that the Local 2030 Network looks at not just climate change, but also environmental, all-around environmental issues. And the Remalak Conservation Framework is a framework that was developed by Marshallese people within our Marine Resources Authority department. And each of these framework has the members of the MIMRA staff going to different islands and working with the communities there to develop their own conservation plan. Now, these conservation plans ended up being the basis for our National Adaptation Plan because they do touch on the conservation issues that they're looking at, but they also look at social issues, and they touch very briefly on adaptation. Now, besides this conservation plan and all of that kind of science that forms the basis of the National Adaptation Plan, we're now embarking onto our community consultations. And this is really exciting for me to be a part of as climate envoy, but also as director of our nonprofit, Jojigum. The community consultations is going to be our biggest widespread sort of public outreach on climate change. What people don't know is the Marshall Islands has over 20 different islands within our island chain. Each of them have different histories, different communities. Nobody ever says, I'm from the Marshall Islands within the Marshall Islands. They say what island they're from specifically, and they hold it very proudly. So with that in mind, we have to go to each of these islands and get their perspectives on what kind of adaptation pathway they would want. So instead of a top-down approach for planning our future, we're actually doing a human rights-based approach that takes into consideration what our community actually needs and what they actually want. And that involves actually working with nonprofits who will target different vulnerable groups. And so our nonprofit, Jojigum, will be leading the youth engagement on these community consultations. And we're actually training the youth we work with to lead the workshops and the consultations. So it's youth-led and youth-voiced within that consultation. And we also have women's groups leading some of the consultations and the conservation groups to make sure that each of the different vulnerable voices are highlighted within our National Adaptation Plan. And so I think this is, there's a lot of areas in which Marshall Islands has been leading the way in declaring a climate emergency early on, in developing our energy roadmap, which we're working on implementing right now. But right now, this is the consultation that's underway as we're speaking here at this conference. The agency which is delivering it, the International Organization on Migration, is working on that as we speak. And our youth, my youth that I work with, are helping to develop that as we're talking on this panel. So I think that's probably what the world could really learn from, is the ways in which we engage with our community in a much more holistic and community-driven way. And I think the rest of the world can incorporate that into their own adaptation planning, because it really shouldn't be top-down. The most vulnerable groups will be hit the hardest, and they need to be voiced and they need to be heard as we're planning for our futures. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. This brings to a close our session here today. I'd just like to make a personal comment on perspective and thank the panel for some very particular approaches. One is the specificity of your comment. One is the seriousness of the issue as you presented it to us, issues. And the third, and probably the most important in closing, is what I would characterize as the guarded optimism of the solutions-oriented actions that each of you addressed. Combating the climate crisis is a challenge, but reflecting on what we've heard here today in this session and this week, I am optimistic that working together we are stronger in moving in the right direction to help our island communities. I'll close simply by saying that I look forward to continuing this very important discussion, even as soon as at the Our Ocean Conference in Palau in February. With that, I say mahalo, aloha, and ask you to thank our distinguished panel. Thank you very much.